Good evening, and thank you for joining me tonight for this session of proofreading tips for the job seeker. My name is Jody Hammer, and I am the Career Services Specialist with NPCA's Global Reentry Program. So, my job is actually to help you, the RPCV job seeker, get a job, move on, whether it's after you've been evacuated or other RPCVs who've been back longer. So we're going to be talking about a very important concept tonight, and that is the proofreading, which is so essential when you're doing your job search. And I'm going to explain why. I'm going to share some resources with you for those of you who maybe don't feel as confident in proofreading, some online resources, many of which are free as well, to assist you. So let's go ahead and get started. So proofreading, I like to say proofreading is really the key to a successful job search, right? Because your materials can, your application materials can really make or break you, right? If you have grammatical errors, if you have, just, typos or just, not well worded phrases or sentences, it really reflects poorly on you, right? It can completely undermine your credibility, your potential at maybe getting that job. And it all comes down to one of the things that I say a lot, and that is your when you put in your application, and they're looking at your resume, they're not spending an hour on a resume, right? They're looking at it for a number of seconds, literally. Like, you'll see differences in the amount, but in general you'll see the figure of 7 to 10 seconds that they're reading your resume or proofing it, not even proofing it, just scanning it at a glance, so that things, to see what pops. And they're determining whether you're going to go into what I call the to be considered further file, or the circular file, aka trash. And of course, nobody wants to land in the trash, because that means your application materials are no longer going to get reviewed, right? So how do you get in the trash? Well, oftentimes it's the result of typos, or lack of attention to detail in how they wrote poorly written resumes, and we're going to talk about a lot of the things that you can do to really improve that and make sure you don't get into that circular file, or reduce the chances of that happening. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about, what do you proofread for? Like, what are the kinds of things that you're looking for when you're proofreading? Obviously, misspellings, right? That's a big one. And, to a large degree, when you're working online, oftentimes the spell check will be caught, which is great, right? You'll have that little red squiggle underneath it, and you know that it's misspelled. So you click on it and it shows you the alternatives. Great. That's wonderful. My 7-year-old has already learned that in her distance learning. So it's very interesting right now with COVID-19, and she's already using that tool. So much to my dismay, I'd rather have her be spelling them from her own just ability. But alas. So you are looking for misspellings, and they do sometimes come out, but sometimes they don't come out, right? Maybe it's the right word, but it's the wrong context of the word, right? Right, like WRITE versus RIGHT. That's not going to, if you write the wrong one in that regard, right? Typographical errors, obviously typos, a lot of times those happen just in haste, right? Oh, you're going fast, you didn't capitalize the first letter, or it's just you forgot a letter, and it's a typo. Not so great, though. It doesn't really leave that impression, a good impression on the employer. So also there's incomplete sentences, the incomplete or poor sentence structure, and I put a little asterisk by this, because honestly, let's face it, when you're writing resumes, excuse me, you are going to should have incomplete sentences, because in resumes you can break that complete sentence rule. You should have really fragments, and ideally ed action verbs starting those bullets, for example, because that's what pops. That's what's going to get across, instead of getting caught in the weeds of, I worked with a committee of 10 people to do. No, it might be collaborated with team of 10 professionals to design and implement whatever it is, right? So that's going to pop a lot more. So Yeah, so definitely that's not a complete sentence. So I put that asterisk there because you certainly can have the incomplete sentences, but you want them to flow well, not be poorly written. And then the inconsistent tense, typically on a resume, you're looking at doing past tense, right? Because your experience is behind you. So you're going to write it from that I tense, right? That first person singular, because you're writing your resume. So it's, but instead of saying I organized and delivered, you would just start with organized and delivered, da, 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 right? You don't say the I. So there's that. And so you usually have everything in the past tense. The exception to that is for your current job, where in your current job, you have, what you're doing right now, it's not going to make sense to put it in the past, right? Um, or sometimes you might have done something like you were, awarded, da 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 da, based on exemplary performance. It was something that happened in the past in your current job that you're spotlighting. It wouldn't make sense to say award or recipient of. I mean, you could say recipient of maybe, and work around it that way. But sometimes there's going to be that in that first entry, your most recent entry, you're going to have that generally in the present tense if you are still working there. Okay. And then grammatical mistakes, obviously, right? So those are all things that we're looking for. In terms of tips for the job seeker, I've adapted this list actually, and it's one that I had found, and I have some other thoughts, and so I've kind of really adapted it, and I have the credit on the next slide. But you don't want to rely on spell check alone, right? Because they're not going to catch everything. Like I said before, that if it's spelled correctly, they might not catch it, right? So you want to read it out loud, um and actually frontwards, like from the beginning to the end, as well as the opposite. And the opposite, even though it's not going to make sense, like the when you're going backwards, in some ways you're looking at each of those words and really making sense, reading it backwards, and then just reading the sentence, and then going one above, so that you're really just focusing in on that little part. That can really help you as well. I'm a big believer in, and this is very contrary to my environmental roots. I am, I consider myself an environmentalist and don't like to print anything out that I don't have to. Um, Save a tree, all of that concept. However, I make an exception when doing like your final proofread for your, for a resume, for example, or a cover letter. By printing it out, it's easier to your eye is more likely to scan over errors, on the screen, and particularly your own errors, right? Because remember, in your eye or in your mind, you know what you're trying to say. So it's sometimes hard for you to proofread your own, and we'll get to that point at the end, the next slide. But basically, you sometimes fill in those your mind does, because it knows what's supposed to be there, if that makes sense, right? So some people will, and I put down here, some people will recommend you even, print it off in a different font than what you used, so that your brain is not accustomed to seeing that same font and that same, what you have there, right? It makes it easier to find mistakes oftentimes on paper. And you can also like use your red pen, and I'm a big red pen fan too, so I definitely make things bleed, as we say, but all in good faith, and trying to really help. um Watch out for the capitalization errors, because these are really easy to miss, right? Not just the first item of like a bullet capitalizing, which is of course what you want to do, right? But certain things that should and shouldn't be capitalized. And when in doubt, like look it up online. If you have a question, how do is this one word or is this two words? We just put out there, we have a boot camp coming up, and it actually starts this Thursday, which is exciting. But I was wondering, boot camp, I think it's one word, but yet it was showing as an error. And so I went online, and it was like, yes, typically boot camp is written as one word. So then I felt better, even though my spell check wasn't liking it. So, look for those kinds of things, and use your resources. You've got a lot of resources at your hand, at your disposal, with online, Google, right? I mean, I always say, when in doubt, Google it, and then look at, credible sources and that kind of thing. Watch your tenses. I already really kind of alluded there. I said this actually, current job is described in the present tense, right? And then your rest of your jobs are in the past tense, and not including the word I. So it's first person singular tense, but it's not putting down I developed and implemented. You would just start with the, ed at whatever action verb, right? So, and then, double checking, your information. And I've seen this happen a lot when people, they send to me something, or I'm looking at, one of their resumes and such, and I find there's an error in their like address, or in their, their contact information, right? Because they know what it's supposed to say, and it just is hard to keep it. It's hard. It's hard to see that, right? But somebody looking from the outside sees the error in, whatever way. So really go through, your all of, your contact information to make sure that it's all accurate, right? That the spacing is, consistent, right? Do the dates make sense? Are you, if however you're doing it, if you're putting the abbreviations, fine, the abbreviate the 3 letters or whatever, and do that consistently. Or, are you doing the numbers 10, 2010, whatever, to whatever. I have a preference for the word, only because the numbers kind of blur, and I feel like it's more work for them. Makes more work, like, okay, wait, that's 10 October. That's just valuable seconds that they're spending on that versus your significant content. So I prefer the dates written out or abbreviated, right? But a big one that I see is the consistency, or rather inconsistency, of your dashes, right? So you have, for example, your something that has like a dash, right? However you're listing something, and you'll do just the one dash, like so I see people that will have space dash space, and that's fine. I like that. That's fine. Or if you do, you can get the M dash usually, which is a little bit longer and really nice. That's my preference. If you just do after the one, like March, and then not space, you would just do dash dash and then April, and it should turn it into that M dash. That's, a nice size. That's my personal preference. Then you can just copy that and use it, but you want it to be consistent. I know it sounds really picky, because what's a dash? I mean, it's just a short dash or a long dash, but it's all about being a visually pleasing and consistent document, and it speaks to you and your attention to detail. And it is, I think, so important. So yeah. So, and then abbreviations, make sure that your abbreviations are correct, like that you're using the correct abbreviation, as well. Okay. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat box. You're welcome to do that, or unmute yourself. We have a very small crowd here. We can definitely have you just unmute yourself as well. So if there are any questions so far, please feel free to do that. All right. Some more proofreading tips that in this, which I've adapted from Experience Jobs. Spell out the acronyms the first time, right? Where you'd put the actual, National Peace Corps Association, and then in parentheses, the acronym NPCA, right? So once you've done that once, then you can refer to it as NPCA, NPCA. Same with returned Peace Corps volunteer. Not everyone knows what RPCV is, believe it or not. We all do, but many, many people don't. So, spelling it out the first time, and then using the acronym from there and being consistent with that. So that's great. Another tip is to make sure when you're doing proofreading, you don't want to proofread when you're really tired. And that's because our minds, our ability to be attentive to detail when we're really tired, or even really stressed, right? We're not able to really focus fully. So we're going to miss things. And you don't want to miss things. You want to make sure that when you proofread, you're catching every little tiny, error or inconsistency, so that you can really put forth your best application. So using action verbs versus passive Verbs, they're much more engaging. So instead of, like, I think, like, helped. I'm not a big fan of using helped, but there's a lot of other, verbs for helped. Collaborated with, coordinated with, right? Assisted sometimes can be okay too, but the same thing. Like, you want to have these more, more engaging, choices, and you don't want to repeat the same thing. So I see people a lot of times when they're going for a job where it involves management, they want to really get through that they've managed, and that's great. So you want to say managed, managed, but you don't want to like put so many managed. It's going to get really tiring for them to see managed so many times. So certainly use the word managed more than other words. But what are some other words for managed that you might use? There's so many other words for managed. For example, supervised, oversaw, directed, spearheaded, led. Like, there's so many different words out there that mean managed, right? So you can kind of, swap it up to some degree so that it's not just managed, 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 right? So that's another big tip that I have in terms of, proofreading. Avoid, excessive punctuation, right? Especially things like, you know, um, exclamation points, right? Because that has the effect of basically screaming, right? So there may be a time where it's appropriate, but in general, on a resume, you're not going to have, exclamation points, right? You're going to talk about it and really bring through things and show your enthusiasm and all of that. But there are some names of companies, for example, Kaboom, which is a great nonprofit that builds, playgrounds and helps, disadvantaged communities. They come together and work together to, like, build this playground that's safe for their, children to go to and things like that. They're at the end of it's Kaboom, and then it's exclamation point. That's part of their title. So, a bit awkward when you're writing it in certain things, but yes, you get used to that. So, definitely also make sure that you do have a period after each complete sentence. Now, remember, on your resume, you're going to have a lot of incomplete sentences or fragments, right? For example, and I generally recommend that you do those in bullets, right? So you don't need to have a period necessarily. However, some people, there's two kind of lines of thinking in this, and I'll explain both, and then I'll tell you where I fall on the spectrum. But either can work, right? There are those that believe it is not a complete sentence, so don't put a period at the end, right? For each bullet or whatever, right? When you're doing bullets. The other camp is, and I fall a little more in this camp, but I'm fine either way. And that is, you know, period, end, stop, end of thought, on to next. It's like, to me, the period helps so much in, like, getting that point across, and then you're going on to a fresh new one. So to me, especially when there are ones that are like 2 or 3 lines long, so you have these bullets that, you don't want a lot of bullets that are that long, but you might have bullets that are fairly long. So I'm more of a fan of using the periods, but what I say is, ultimately, it's up to you. Choose what you want to do, what works for you, and stick with it and be consistent. That's the key. You don't want to, go back and forth. That's what's going to make your application look weak. Okay. And then hanging parentheses, and I will tell you, this is probably my own number one weakness is, I sometimes am putting things in parentheses. So I'm very good about, on the front end, having that parentheses, and then I'm working with the little part that's in parentheses, and I forget to put that hanging, that end part, and that's a big no-no. So it's something that I have to really go back and, like, look at and be, conscious of, and be looking for, to make sure that doesn't happen. We all have our weaknesses, right? And then lastly here, enlisting a few, I say experts, but really what I mean are people who have a really good eye for editing, or for, proofreading. Some people are really good at that by naturally. Some other people work in maybe editing for a living. They're in the communications department and they edit things, all the time. So somebody like that, or a friend that you trust, right, to proofread your own, your job search materials. Now, are you going to give them absolutely everyone? Probably not. You're going to have them get very tired if you do that. But to do one for you so you can kind of see what they think, wow, this is great. Okay, that's very helpful. And, and using that and applying it for the future. And you might, ask somebody else for another one if there's, a need. So all of those, like I said, the second set of eyes can be so helpful because you know it's trying to say, like what it's meant to say. So you can't see sometimes those things, those words that might escape you. And that's true for all of us. So, okay. So there are, for those of you who maybe consider editing and proofreading not to be your real forte, I want to tell you about some online proofreading tools, and there are many. The probably one of the biggest and most respected ones is grammarly.com, which is pretty cool. It's a pretty cool tool. And there's actually a free version and then there's a paid version, right? And like most things, I believe with the job search, you can get what you need generally out of the free version. Now, if you're somebody that proofreading, like, editing and grammar is really something that's a difficulty for you, you might consider, investing in maybe the premium level. But I really think that it has what you need in the basic one, and that's fine, and that's it, and that's free. The difference between the two, there's, for example, the price, free versus I think it's currently like 29.95 or something like that per month. So that's a pretty pricey investment, especially when you're probably doing a job search. If you're not working, you're really trying to keep those expenses down. Which was what I talked about last week in the whole budgeting and living on a budget. During the job search, and you're probably not looking to fork out another $30, and you probably don't have to. Some organizations like topresume.com, they offer a free resume review, and I believe it's for one, like to show you, they'll come back with the information, and it's really helpful that it can show you, like, okay, where you could strengthen, where you could, improve, what you should, change, and then you can incorporate that into and apply that to your future job postings. Now, I don't know what they charge for future ones. I really don't know. If somebody does, certainly, drop it in the chat box, but I don't know what that is, but you can find out by just going to topresume.com. And if you want to submit a resume, I have the direct hyperlink right there for you, to submit one. Okay. Great. And there are some other proofreading tools as well. If anyone knows other ones, if you know of some other ones that you've used in particular, drop it in the chat box, and that would be great. I'd love to see those as well. So there are a lot out there. If you do, I mean, again, as with most things, if you do a Google search on best, free online proofreading tools, you're going to get probably a list of, oh, these are the ones, and many of them might have a free and a paid version. Try the free one, and a lot of times they'll give you like a free trial of the expanded. Well, great, use it as long as you are good at and diligent about, putting when you started that date and when it expires, and canceling it before then, because otherwise what happens is they don't notify you necessarily. They just wrap you in, and because you have to give your credit card up front generally, and then they just wrap you into that where you're paying for it every month. So you want to be really careful about that. I'm just always cognizant about trying to keep expenses down for the RPCVs. At this point, really, I want to, and we have plenty of time for questions. If there are any questions, definitely, happy to answer any of those. If you want to drop them in the chat box there, I'll look here and see if there are any. And I don't think.
I had a quick question, Jody.
Sure. Yes. Go ahead, Dylan.
So earlier in your presentation, you talked about when using singular, like first person language, not to use the word I.
Yep.
How would you recommend writing, like, to avoid that, but still talking about your accomplishments? Like whether it's like a skill that you have, like
Yep.
competencies, or like, do you understand what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
I definitely understand the question. It's a great question. Absolutely. You would just leave off the I. So like when you're thinking about crafting a sentence, you can definitely put in the I, like I collaborated with, or I wrote, received, and monitored or implemented USAID funded grant to build community libraries serving whatever, village of, whatever the population, right? You could write it like that. You don't have I, you just leave that I off and you start with that ed. Generally it's an ed action verb, but sometimes it might be like oversaw or whatever. When you talk about trying to get your skill statements in, and I'm glad you're talking about that, because it is so important in your resume to emphasize the skills that you used, that you developed, right? The results or the outcomes. We talk about that STAR methodology, situation, task, action, and results. It doesn't have to always be in that order. So another creative way, instead of, completely resulting in and having that be the ending all the time, you might start one of your bullets with, and again, this is leaving out the I, you could just say, achieved a 23% increase in blah, blah, blah through, and then whatever it was you did. But you're not saying I, you're just saying, right? And sometimes you're maybe wanting to say you worked with a team. Instead of I collaborated with a team of 10, it would just be collaborated with team of 10 professionals to design and implement blah, 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 right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then I was wondering if I'm writing the cover letter, is it in that case, if it's for that document, would I be using the
Thank
word
you.
I or?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, because I meant to actually go into the cover letter a little bit at the end here anyway. So this has all been kind of resume centric, right? Where, it's the fragment sentences and all of that. Now, turn the page. Now, the cover letter. And I strongly recommend that you do a cover letter, even if they don't require it. Obviously, if they ask for it, you're going to do it. But a lot of people are like, well, they didn't ask for it. And so I'm just going to do the resume, whatever. And I've heard from people, they'll say, I've heard from people that, some people that they're hiring manager here and they don't even look at cover letters really. And that's true. Some may not look at them, but others like me it may not be a requirement that's said in the, verbatim in the, application directions, but it's an expectation that if you really want a job, you need to be willing to, do a cover letter to show your, number one, you're showing your writing skills, right? Whatever you're saying about your work and all of that, you're able to put together a well-crafted, succinct, you know, descriptive, but not too long, right? Um, Cover letter to describe why you're interested in that job. I mean, to me, that's a huge thing. And I will look at, like, if I'm on a hiring team, whatever, and I have, there's cover letters and resumes, I'm looking at who, to bring in. I'm definitely going to look at those cover letter folks first and like really, and see. And obviously, it's not that somebody can't get to an interview without a cover letter, but there are some people like me who are much more sticklers on like really wanting one, and it's pretty darn important, right? And there are others on the other spectrum, like I said, that aren't. But let's get into more talking about briefly the cover letter and how you incorporate what I've talked about in the proofreading, right? So a lot of those proofreading kind of, resume types of things that we talked about on that side, you are going to use, for the most part, full sentences in your cover letter, right? So, and you're going to break it down. I generally say like that first paragraph is either, your like a story, some kind of compelling story about, ever since the age of 5, when I lived in da 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 da, we, I knew of this, or some, whatever it is, like whatever your little story is, if you have something that's really unique, or it's something as simple as, I'm thrilled to, apply for the XYZ position, at whatever the organization's name, upon, as per the recommendation of, and whoever your contact is, drop that contact person's name right there up front in that first paragraph, right? And then your second sentence and maybe last sentence in that paragraph can be something like, because of my master's in da 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 da, or and X years of specialized experience, whatever it is that's meeting what they're looking for. I'm, well qualified, for this position, or and most, most interested, or passionate about whatever it is. You can really kind of make it yourself. You don't want it to sound formulaic. Um, Then you're going to go into in that second paragraph a little more in detail about how you qualify, right? Your experience, your, that kind of thing, but in a way where it's like, I'm confident my, proven competencies in da 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 would be well utilized in this, position. Da, 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 you're really making that case for why am I a strong candidate for this, right? So, and you're using full sentences absolutely in this, unlike the resume. Now, sometimes there's kind of a modified cover letter where you might have, people might have like that first paragraph, and then you might have some bullets, like my strengths or whatever, include the file or something, and then you might have some bullets. In those bullets, you may or may not, you may have some items listed that aren't full sentences, and that's okay, right? When you're doing a bulleted list, we know that you can do that. But again, then in the end, that last paragraph kind of re-emphasizing and really and asking for an interview, outright asking, I would welcome the chance for an interview at which time we could further discuss my XYZ skills and passion, proven passion for this position. I can be reached at da 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 da. Da. Thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing from you. Something like that, right? You want to really let them know, I want to talk to you about this more. I'm really excited and confident I would be a good fit. Like, it's that's so important, you know? And Dylan, I don't know if that answered your questions or if you have any more related to the cover letter. It is very important as well.
Yeah, that was really helpful.
Great. Okay.
Or I don't,
Well, I'm
I'm
glad.
sorry. I accidentally muted myself. I
No
don't know
problem.
if this is like the correct philosophy, but I think when I try and go about writing a cover letter, I typically try and do it where I'm like either providing context to like relevant things in my resume that I'm trying to
Right.
highlight on, or I'm
Yep.
trying to like really mention things in my resume, but in a different light that would like
Yep.
suit the
Yeah.
position a little bit more. Is that kind of like the
That's
line
great.
of writing?
That's great, Dylan. What you don't want to do is just regurgitate exactly what they're going to see and hear in your resume, right? You want to say it in a way or talk about the skills and fill in like there might be some context that, could really be helpful. All of that. So yeah, absolutely. And if you weren't able to view it live, if you go to the if you go to our careers page, right, on, NPCA, Peace Corps Connect.org, and you go to our careers page there, under global reentry and careers page, you should see a link there to and I always put it in every, like, if you've gotten any of the follow-ups from us after any of these events, the first bullet shown is usually the global reentry playlist on the YouTube channel, NPCA's YouTube channel, where we have one that's specifically talking about cover letters, and you might want to listen to that at your convenience as well, because it'll go into much more detail about kind of that philosophy of and what you want to do and not do, and you're on the right path though. You don't want to just regurgitate the same information. You want to really augment it and show how well you write, all of those, and I think that's especially important. Like if you're going for a job, even more so, I think it's important in general, but even more so if you're going for a job where you are going in like communications or an editing job, something where you're going to be writing. Oftentimes they'll give you a writing, like they'll want a writing sample or do a writing test with you where literally it's, right there in the moment, just to see how you, do write on your own and such. But regardless, and you would therefore definitely want to do a cover letter because you want them to see, yes, I can really write, this is, for that. So does that make sense?
Perfect. Yeah, that was really good. I have one more follow-up question, and I guess this one
Sure.
is kind of a shorter one.
No
But
problem.
I've kind of been wondering recently when I'm submitting to like a lot of like NGOs or organizations that are like really mission focused,
Yep.
like what the balance or like a percentage or like really what the mix of talking about like my like solid skills in my cover letter and like my qualifications versus like talking about like my passion or like my interest or like
Yeah.
why I want to do that.
Well, and that's what I was saying. I really see it as a mix of both. I want to see, especially for organizations like, humanitarian work, which by the way, we're going to have a round table, I believe it's next week, that is on the humanitarian sector. And it's going to be a roundtable, and it's actually more organized by some RPCVs working in that field that get a lot of questions. And so I worked with them to, hey, let's do a roundtable and give you opportunities to talk a little bit about it and then answer questions, really. So you should definitely come to that if you're interested in kind of mission or, oriented, that kind of work. But also to answer your question, in general with like nonprofits or mission driven types of organizations, yes, you absolutely want to show that like your passion for it. So any kind of connection you might have, maybe you've been volunteering with Special Olympics since you were however many years old, who knows, right? And you're applying for a job there, and like you'd want to definitely share that. And my passion for this has grown through my X years of committed volunteerism in the whatever, where I've met the most incredible athletes and, whatever it is, right? You tell your story to make that case for yourself, but also show that you're passionate, because that's what drives us. I mean, in that mission driven, and I put myself in this era, in this area as well, right? We're not as motivated by money. Don't get me wrong. Not that we wouldn't like to be paid, and we want to be paid, and we need to be paid to survive and all of that, but we're much more oftentimes driven by that sense of connection and helping others and all of those kinds of things that are really important for our sense of feeling fulfilled. So I think that is instrumental to share that as well, that you're on board with that. So if you can do, for example, some informational interviews, or as I prefer to call them, career chats with people working in that organization to get a better sense of like, what is the organizational culture like? Is it, mission driven, passion, whatever, like getting that so that then you know what to emphasize even, right? And of course, if you've done a career chat with somebody and then you apply for a job later, make sure that you let them know. Not say, hey, put a good word in for him, but say, hey, I was just thinking of you today. I'm applying for this job. It just reminded me of our great conversation. Thank you so much for all the insight. I found this opportunity in the XYZ sector or whatever there. Not sure if you have any familiarity with it, but it seemed like a really good fit and I'm excited about it. Would love any kind of insight you might have. Who knows, they may know the people in that department who are even hiring, right? And that's how a lot of times connections are made, and that's how a lot of times jobs are filled. Outside of the federal sector, where you have the like open to all US citizens, that most of their jobs have to be posted, except for things like NCE and some other whatever. But in the private sector and the rest of the world, I mean, and even it helps in it can help even in the government in some ways, right? But a lot of people get hired because of networking. Like that's how they find out about this position, or that's how they get chosen to interview, and then people are like, wow, he was great, you're right, he was awesome. It's not like you're going to get something you don't deserve by doing that, but you could get into the finalists to then make your case and be among the finalists being chosen, instead of one of those 300 applications that may have come in that may never, many of them never even reach there. So does that make sense, Dylan?
Yeah, that was super helpful. I feel like it was really reaffirming to hear you say that, because that's kind of, I think, on this phase of my job search, the route I'm trying to take, and talk to like a lot of people that work in that department, or people, if I'm like applying for something where someone is transitioning out, and trying to talk to the
Yep,
person who's transitioning out and seeing whatever wisdom
exactly.
they have.
No, that's great. You're doing exactly the right thing. It's that combination of it's networking and then finding the jobs and then letting people know when you are applying for them. Thanks so much, I really appreciate it. Let them offer. Oftentimes they're gonna offer, to be like, oh, let me forward your application on. And honestly, sometimes now a lot of companies have referral bonuses. They like to hire that way, because if they're happy with Jane, the employee that then ends up referring you, they feel she's credible and she's referring you, she's connecting you to them. It's like, wow, well, she's been great. I bet they'd be great too, right? So it can really help. And they oftentimes give bonuses, and sometimes pretty hefty ones. So it can, there's something in it for them too, to be, hey, I'd love to refer on, qualified people. So yeah. So that's how that works. Any other questions on any aspect of, proofreading, whether it's the resume, the cover letter, a writing sample, any of that?
I have just like a one last one.
Sure.
This is kind of like, I feel like sometimes I wonder, like I feel like I've hit a wall, and like the creativity or like the amount of times where, for if it's for different positions, like I can try and express the same thing in different ways, or how I can improve what I'm writing in that cover letter. Is there
Yeah.
anything you recommend doing like when you feel like you've hit that point?
Yeah, and I think that point is common, right? It's oftentimes it's kind of a I don't want to say burnout, but it's like a lack of motivation because a variety of factors, right? It's like I've been doing this for so long now, I'm still doing it. What am I doing wrong? I'm trying to increase, and improve everyone. So it's kind of, I think it can get like hard to keep engaged in your job search after a certain period of time oftentimes, and oftentimes those are like these, we have the, oh, it's been x number of months, I can't believe I'm not employed, like it's you pressuring yourself more often than others. Sometimes it can be parents or whoever you're, if you're living with, or friends or whatever, I can't believe it, come on, just take something, but a lot of times it's ourselves, right? And we're our own worst, I think, critic. One of the ways to, I think, avoid that, or to try to avoid that, is to make it as easy as possible on yourself, i.e., not trying to reinvent the wheel and come up with a fresh cover letter from the ground up for each and every job that you're going for, right? Once you get that kind of more or less how, the story and leading into whatever, you can adapt that to different ones and have it be very tailored and very, spot on. It's not going to look like something that's just a generic, here's my application for it's not going to come out as that. But if you use, what I say to people is, every time you apply for a job, because let's face it, you're probably applying for various types of jobs, right? When you are applying for a job, look at your cover letter and your resume that you used to apply for the job that is most similar to this job that you're going for now. Doesn't have to be identical. It's not going to be identical, right? It's not the same job. But if you start with that one, there's a lot less tweaking that you have to do, right? If it's the same kind of skill set they're looking for, the same kind of, right? So you can save yourself that energy. Now, one thing that helps with this is if you keep a master log of all the jobs that you applied for, right? And this can be an Excel spreadsheet, Google, slide, whatever, Google spreadsheet, whatever. But and it doesn't even matter if it's this ginormous that goes out forever, because you're really not even going to be printing it off. It's more for you to keep organized when you look at, right, your, your laptop and stuff, where you can see, okay, what was the job title? What was the organization, or however the columns can be in whatever order you think, but the organization, the job title, the job description. Now, link to it is fine, but don't link to the one that's online, because oftentimes that one, as soon as it closes the application, that disappears. So you want to have one, you just save it to your computer, whatever, your laptop, wherever, so that you can have it there, so that if and when they do call you, even if it's a ways in the future, because sometimes it is, you don't have to go, oh, great, what job is this? What was the title? Like, you want to be able to be like, oh, certainly, and have that all at your disposal. It'll just make you shine, right? So keeping that kind of a log can help you look at like the most recent, or the job that's the most similar to the job that you're going for now, right? And then you can click on that cover letter, link to the version of the cover letter and the version of the resume, save it as a different file, and then work with it. And it should theoretically take less time. But you know what? It does take time, and I know it's frustrating, and it can just really get old. Another thing to go along with that is, take some breaks. You can't just look at it as, okay, I'm unemployed, my full-time job is my job search, and expect that you're going to be able to do 8 hours of productive job searching and working on resumes and cover letters and all of that. If you do that, you're going to be burned out before you know it, right? So yes, it's your full-time job. and you're going to have some of your most creative spaces and your most like helpful, maybe going on a walk and getting outside and into nature and just, getting some breathing time so that you can come back and you can be more focused rather than burning yourself out and, burning the midnight oil and just being like, I got to do this, I got to keep doing this. Because when you do that, that's when a lot of times these errors happen that you talk about in, we talk about in proofreading. If you're just really trying to keep yourself, go, 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 I've got to get something. And I get it that it's tough, especially if you're in a situation where it's like, okay, I have X amount of money in my bank account and I need to have a job within this month or I'm homeless. I mean, it's not a good situation to be in, obviously. And so in those cases, you might, someone might need to refocus and look at getting a job that like pays the bare minimum of what you need to survive. And then you can have more of, I mean, you've got to look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You can't be focusing on your dream job, and trying to make applications for that when you don't have, food on the table or you don't have a shelter. So, you have to make some of those, commitments as well. I don't know, Dylan, if that answered your question or if there's any part that it didn't. I'm happy to take the other.
That was spot on. That was awesome to hear. Yeah, I feel like I definitely do a lot of the good things that you're talking about, and then I also feel like I'm guilty of a lot of like the negative things you're talking about as well,
Yeah.
like pressuring yourself. But it was really good. That was a really good answer. Thank you so much.
Okay, sure. It's so common and just it's that try not to like should on yourself. That's the biggest, advice that I oftentimes give clients, right? Where you're comparing yourself to whoever in your stage or in your whatever group. They got a job in 2 months and she got a job in 5 months, and you're like, what's wrong with me? I mean, that's common that people are going through that kind of thing as well, where you're comparing, yourselves. And that doesn't really help you because it just has you go down that kind of so I'm glad to hear that you are doing those, taking those breaks, right? Rewarding, set up a reward structure as well. When you do get, maybe you reach your goal of, something for that week and get that cover letter and something put in, you do something now, obviously not something that's very expensive because you don't have a lot of money probably right now when you're looking for a job, but something where it's, maybe allowing yourself to be able to go to, I don't know, the National Arboretum if you're in DC, it's free. Going and looking at the beautiful trees and it's outdoors, so fairly safe. And I just something where or some little whatever you can work in these crazy COVID times. It's a little bit different than than our normal conversations, where you might think, oh, I'll go visit my friend in Cincinnati, and yeah, life is a bit crazy now. So you also have that, I think, on top of everything else, and then you throw this little election, on top of it where there's all this other stress. I think that's where oftentimes too we kind of get buried in the stress and the anxiety as well. So all right. Well, thank you so much. I think I'm going to go ahead and end this now. Thank you so much for joining me. I can stay on for a few minutes afterwards if people have questions, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and just answer questions afterwards. Then one on one. Thanks, everyone, and good luck to you. And things will come together. They truly will. It's a matter of time. And hang in there and work on your proofreading. And let me know if I can be of assistance. Take care.